Welcome back to the next lecture. So far we have talked about what integers are. That was lecture 4, which was the module 2.1, the section 2.1. And then in section 2.2, which was lecture 5, we talked about how to combine integers of different types. So how to combine positive integers with positive integers, how to combine positive integers with negative integers, how to combine negative integers with positive integers. And then in lecture 2. For lecture 2.3, lecture 6, we had how do you combine negative and negative, and all of this we've been doing with addition. Or in another way, how do we subtract positive numbers from a negative number. And so we've built up a pretty good understanding of what integers are so far and how to add them, both positive and negative. Now we're going to talk about, in this lecture, lecture 7, we're going to talk about how to multiply them, because really we have two fundamental operations on the real numbers, on numbers, that kind of define how these numbers work and how our number system kind of works intuitively, and that is addition and multiplication. Since we've already covered addition, let's move on to multiplication and its corresponding inverse, which is division. So let's do negative 9 times 3. I've kind of hinted at this in previous videos, but whenever you see the negative 9 out front, what this really means is negative 9 is negative 1 times 9. And here's the way to look at that. We're just going to take some integer n, and we know it's opposite of negative n. So whenever we go n units to the right, for example, if we wanted to say go n units to the right and then flip it, go that far, basically flip it like this, that operation of reversing is what multiplication by negative 1 is. So it's saying instead of going n units to the right, go n units to the left. Alternatively, if you go, here's 0. If you go n units to the left, so to negative n, and you want to say, flip that over and do it positive n, we can multiply again by negative 1. We've already talked about this, believe it or not. All this top one is saying is that negative 1 times n is negative n. So the opposite of n is negative n. We've already said that. And down here, we're saying negative 1 times negative n. So the opposite of negative n is n. And the way we actually wrote this was negative n, right? If you remember. If we see this in this notation, and I'll go to a new page here, if we see negative n, for example, what that really means, like the actual operation that we're doing, is negative 1 times n. Or negative n, what that operation means is negative 1 times negative n, which is the same thing as negative 1 times negative 1 times n, right? Because you can break apart that negative n there to negative 1 times n. So let's talk about this negative 1 times negative 1 business, because we've not really talked about it. So we have our number line, 0, negative 1, 1. If we start out at negative 1, and then we multiply by negative 1, what that means is flipping it to be on the opposite side of 0, which is just 1. So negative 1 times negative 1 is just 1 times n, and 1 times anything is just itself. So what we've just proven is negative of a negative, whenever it's multiplied, is the same thing as doing nothing. And that's just, we go negative, and then we do the opposite of that. The opposite of the opposite is really just the same thing, is all we're saying. Okay. Let's actually do some examples, because we could talk about the theory all day, but until we do examples, it may not be completely clear what's going on. I know I am a big fan of examples, and it's difficult for me sometimes to grasp things without an adequate number of examples. So -2 times -5. The way we can write this, we can always break this down until we get the product of positive numbers with some amount of negative ones. So let me show you that. -2 is the same thing as -1 times 2, right? And then I'm going to go ahead and put these in bigger brackets. -5 is going to be -1 times 5. Putting these together, we get -1 times 2 times -1 times 5. Multiplication is commutative, just like addition was, so we can swap the ordering of things. So we can say this is -1 times -1 times 2 times 5. We already said -1 times -1 is just +1. The opposite of an opposite is just the same thing. So really we're left with 1 times 2 times 5, or just 2 times 5, which is 10. So -2 times -5 is just 10. Okay. In general, if you want just a hard and fast rule, here it is. We're going to build a table. A positive number times a positive number is a positive number, and this is, again, multiplication. A positive number times a negative number is a negative number. A negative number times a positive number is a negative number. The negative number times a negative number is a positive number. If the signs are the same, negative times a negative or a positive times a positive, then that's going to give you a positive. If the signs are different, positive times a negative or a negative times a positive, you're going to get a negative for multiplication. And this also applies for division as well. So let's do 15 divided by -5. Well, what this is saying is 15 times 1 over -5, right? Because that's what division means. Real quick on that, x divided by y is the exact same thing as x times 1 over y. Right, or the way you may see that is x over y. So x over y, you've probably seen this notation before. X over y is the exact same thing as x divided by y. So I just like to use this middle process here, this x times 1 over. Okay. So as I've mentioned previously from our previous slide, we know that for multiplication and division, if you have a positive number on top and a negative number on bottom, so we have a positive number and a negative number, we're going to get a negative. So this is 15 times -1 over 5. Okay, so now we have a positive number and a negative number. Positive times a negative is a negative. So we have negative 15 divided by 5, which is -1 times 15 over 5, which is -1 times 3, which is just the same thing as -3. So 15 divided by -5 is -3. And to really hammer this point home, if you remember our chart that we had before, let's do it again, but with actual numbers this time. 15 divided by 3 is 5. Sorry, I think we did 15 divided by 5. 15 divided by 5 is 3. Negative 15 divided by 5, you can go through a similar process and work this out of what we just did, is going to be negative 3. 15 divided by negative 5, which is what we just did, was negative 3. And then negative 15 divided by negative 5. I put these in parentheses. Well, if we do that one really quick, negative 15 is the same thing as negative 1 times 15. And we know that negative 5 is the same thing as negative 1 times 5. So negative 15 divided by negative 5 is going to be negative 1 times 15 divided by negative 1 times 5, which we can break this up into negative 1, and we're going to talk about this more later, I think, divided by negative 1 times 15 divided by 5. Anything divided by itself is just 1, and then 15 divided by 5 is 3, which just leaves us with 3. So this, I'm going to go ahead and erase this. This is just exactly the same thing we had earlier, just with real numbers, or actual numbers. We have positive, negative, negative, positive. And if you recall what we had over here, positive, negative, negative, positive. So this is just the table that would happen in general with both multiplication and division. And then here's an example with actual numbers. Okay, we'll do one more for this lecture. 2 more, actually, I think, for this lecture. Let's do negative 2 to the power of 3. Okay, what does that power mean? It means negative 2 times itself 3 times. So let's go ahead and write that out. And each one of these, let's just focus on 2 of them at a time. Let's start with these 2. Okay, we're left with negative 2 times negative 2. A negative times a negative, that's a positive. So that's going to be 4. And we're still left with negative times negative 2 over here. Well, 4 times negative 2, that's a positive times a negative. So that's going to be a negative from our table. So 4 times negative 2 is going to be negative 8. Okay. One more example, and that's going to be 18 times, you know what, let's do 3x minus 4y plus 6 when x is negative 1 and y is negative 2. So we're going to do we're going to start by plugging everything in. So 3x is 3 times negative 1 minus 4y is 4 times negative 2 plus 6. And then I'm going to go ahead and rewrite this. 3 times negative 1 plus, I'm just going to make this plus negative 4 times negative 2. If you recall, this minus sign is the same thing as plus a negative. Plus 6. Okay, here we have a positive times a negative, that's a negative. Here we have a negative times a negative, that's a positive. And then we have plus 6. Negative 3 plus 8 is 5. If you recall from a couple lectures ago, we talked about how to calculate that. So negative 3 plus 8 is 5. 5 plus 6 is going to give us 11. Okay, I'll go ahead and stop there.